Hi, you've reached Burger King. To leave a message, press 1.
Hey, Burger King, it's Mike calling again. I called a billion times about the burgers and the chicken and the flame grilling. My big idea. Call me back. I'm here at home.
Michael, didn't we talk about you trying the new flame grilled chicken burger from Burger King? A savory flame grilled chicken patty topped with veggies on a toasted bun. Now just 2 for $5. Or mix and match with another delicious sandwich, part of the 2 for $5 deal. The new flame grilled chicken burger, only at Burger King. Limited time only. Price and participation vary.
Like the mafia, but we're religious. Hey. everybody. Welcome to RFB Radio, heard on Red Sox Radio, sometimes heard on Block Talk Radio, but always heard on Pundit Press, SHR Media, and Spreaker. I'm your host. I'm Cal Fritzy, and my fellow host, of course, is the illustrious, the wonderful, the stupendous Mr. Tim Button. Hi, Tim. How are you today?
For a moment there, I thought you were going to say, the one and only.
The award goes too.
Yes, indeed. Good evening, Kel, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for being with us tonight. And as you may have detected a faint trace of sarcasm in Miss Fritz's voice when she says, occasionally we can be heard on Blog Talk Radio. You can deduce from that we have been having a few little glitches where our great friend Blog Talk Radio has been concerned, and well, I don't know quite what it will take to resolve it, but be assured, Miss Fritzy is on the case. She has the personal phone number of one of the most senior executives in Blog Talk Radio, and I think her intention is to phone him up at 3 o'clock in the morning and not let him go until he's sorted the problem out. So I have every confidence that these problems are going to be sorted very, very soon. Isn't that right,
Oh,
Kel?
I'm going to have to put it right in the show notes is what I'm going to have to do for the archive listeners, too, because I really do enjoy my Blog Talk Radio podcast because I love listening to real people, not the bubble-headed bleach blondes over there at CNN. I like listening to real journalism, and when I can't hear my podcast, I get very cranky.
Well, quite understandable too. I mean, Blog Talk Radio, for all its faults, is one of the best media that I've come across to disseminate the kind of message that we have. And I mean, one of the things I like about Blog Talk Radio is you can actually see how effective you are, and it publishes statistics to show whereabouts you are in the scheme of things. So if you think your delivery needs improving, you can try various things from week to week and see what the listeners think of it all. I mean, I in this particular category, which is conservative politics, I think there's about 1,000 shows. Now, Kel, I don't know if you can tell me by looking at the statistics how Red Fox Radio has been doing there, but I think we find it quite a good medium for spreading this message.
I'm going to tell you something, and this is amazing. We're sitting on page 2 right now, but that's because some of the shows had been on hiatus. But even for us being away for quite a while, we're doing all right. We're doing quite well. Some of the shows are number 1 on page 1. I don't know what we're doing here, Tim.
Well, how about that? I think there's a big hand needed for Miss Fritzy concerning that, because, as you know, ladies and gentlemen, Kel works assiduously in order to bring the highest quality programs to your listening doorstep, as it were, and I think she deserves a big round of applause for that. Now, I haven't got a big round of applause here, but we have. I know we have one somewhere. Clap, clap.
I don't know where it is. You know what? We have so many sound bites in here. I don't even know where I put half of them. But how's the weather out there for you? Oh,
well, it's getting a bit wintry over here, Kel. I have to say, Kel is wonderful. She likes to put the co-host at ease with desultory chats about the weather, because she knows that we Brits love that stuff. We can't get enough of it. If you ever wonder what you need to say to a Brit, if you meet a Brit, you've never met him before, and you're wondering what to say to him, just talk about the weather. You just can't go wrong. And over here today, Kel, it's been quite cold, and winter is definitely making its presence felt over here. Not as bad as in some years. But what about you? I mean, you're in the land of moose, elk, and polar bears, aren't you? So I imagine you've got a bit of snow.
There is snow on the ground, and I'm getting a little, confused here. Who on earth named January after the god Janus, who is apparently the keeper of the door? Because that bastard left the door open, It's free.
Yeah. Yay, shut that door. You're letting all the drafts in. Yeah, that's right. It does seem rather inappropriate, doesn't it, I have to say.
Oh, indeed. It's just been so cold here, but I will persevere. But I do look rather fancy in my woolies. And
do you wear them over or underneath your ball gown, if I may make so to ask, Miss Fritzing?
Oh, usually underneath my ball gown.
So I'm just building up a mental picture.
It would be
here.
hard to fill the ball gown into the pants.
I'm sure it's not doing
but I'm quite a sight. For anybody who loves watching wilderness movies, there's always a character in these movies, and she's a well-worn woman manning the CB in some cabin somewhere, and she's wearing a lumber jacket or something. That's me. That's me.
All right.
Right.
Oh,
there
okay.
you go.
But, yeah, excellent. I've got the picture now, so wonderful. Well, I'm slightly I'm not quite so afflicted with the cold as you are over there. I know it's cold outside, but in here it's all warm and toasty. We've got a very good invention over here that somebody thought up a few years ago. It's called central heating, and it actually keeps your house quite warm and toasty. But I know in places like Canada, if you get cold, you just have to throw another elk on the fire and just hope that it warms you up, don't you? So it's a bit more involved over there than it is here, so I understand.
Okay, you know what? I have been to England. You guys don't have the hottest summers. Don't rub it in.
No, that's very true. We had summer this year, but unfortunately, I was in the bathroom and I missed it. So Kelly's absolutely right. We don't do wonderful summers, but enough of all this weather chit chat, Kel.
I know.
We've got a packed program tonight because, as we always like to say, Islam is the gift that keeps on giving. And I was wondering what you had in store for us tonight.
Well, we are still dissecting and deconstructing Robert Spencer's book, The Complete Guide to Islamic State, or ISIS, as it's entitled. And we're moving into Chapter 1. And I'm learning, oh my goodness, Tim, I'm only on Chapter 1, and I have learned a slew of things about Islamic State already.
Well, indeed, as have I. And if any of our listeners are interested in this particular book, it's available on Amazon. I could give you the ISBN book reference, but it's probably just as easy for you to go to Amazon, type in Robert Spencer, The Complete Infidel's Guide to ISIS, and buy yourself a copy as soon as you can. I can't recommend it highly enough.
We're doing Robert Spencer a huge solid here. I put the link on where people can get the book direct to his website at jihadwatch.org. So we're really treating Robert Spencer like a king here, aren't we? He's gonna wonder why his ratings have bumped up.
To be fair, I think he writes in a very fluent and comprehensive manner, and I can't recommend him highly enough. I've read some of his other publications before this one. He's written a dozen books, which you'll find reference to either on the Jihad Watch site or on the Amazon website. But this one I definitely recommend, The Complete Infidel's Guide to ISIS. It tells the reader an awful lot more of the background information that led to the rise of ISIS and various aspects of it that you'll never see reported in the mainstream media, and you probably won't hear them discussed much outside the scholarly circles, because of course Robert Spencer's a great one for researching scholarly details and relaying them to the reader or to the listener in a way that makes it instantly understandable. So yeah, I've got a great deal of time for Robert Spencer, and I'm very happy to promote his book, and I'm not even getting paid for it, so how good is that?
I know. He doesn't even know we're doing this.
No, I know.
But it is a fascinating book. It is, and I'm very pleased to break it down for the listeners because it is quite an important topic. I mean, Islamic State, the latest entity that we're dealing with right now, and probably the most brutal. I don't know if there could possibly be any other organization that could top the atrocities and the piousness of Islamic State. And it's shameful to use that word, pious, but that's what they are. They're engaging in piousness, and they are restoring Islam to its true form. People, when you hear about Islamic-inspired attacks and you hear your politicians saying, oh, this has nothing to do with Islam, that really pisses off Islamic State because they are like, wait a minute, it has everything to do with Islam.
Yes,
this is what we're doing. We're returning Islam to its true form. And so that really annoys them. But I did not realize that it was a little older than I thought. I thought Islamic State actually came along a mere 4 or 5 years ago, but apparently it's been about since the 1990s. I did not know that.
Well, in one form or another. I mean, the thing is that when it was declared as Islamic State, that was actually at the time that they formed the Caliphate, and on the run up to that, the people who were involved in the formation of Islamic State weren't too sure about declaring a caliphate for the simple reason that if they declared it too early, then it might alert the rest of the world, in particular the United States and their very considerable military capacity. And if they declared the caliphate too early, then there was a good chance it would just be crushed. But of course, as it happened, an awful lot of things transpired to come about at the same time, which we will go over during the course of analysing this book. But the caliphate was announced at the same time that they were going to change the name from ISIS, which stood for the Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham, and they just decided to call it to Islamic State at the same time that the caliphate came into being. And that was announced as a very specific event when Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi announced that he was going to be the leader of this caliphate. And it was a wake-up call for all the Muslims in the world because, and I hope I don't want to jump too far ahead, Kel, but it's important the listeners know that the call for a caliphate is a very significant one in Muslim ideology, and legend. Well, I say legend has it. It's in the Quran and the Islamic writings that the caliphate will rise again, and that'll be the banner for all Muslims to rally under in the cause of jihad. And tens of thousands of Muslims have done exactly that. But the process of how the Islamic State actually came about and the run up to the formation of the caliphate, that makes very interesting reading, and it's going to be part of what we're going to be dissecting today. Regular listeners to this show will know that last week we talked a little bit about the timeline leading from the death of the Islamic prophet Muhammad in 632 AD, and we touched on various events through the centuries leading up to not quite the present day, but shortly before the present day, and endeavoured to show the listeners that there was a connection that actually dated right back to the earliest days of Islam. So that, as you say, Kel, when the politicians come out after every Islamic atrocity and say this has nothing to do with Islam, and when they say the Islamic State has nothing to do with Islam, they couldn't be more wrong. And it's one thing for us to say that they're wrong, but this book points to exactly why politicians are wrong when they say this. And once you've read this book, you'll be under no illusion as to how the politicians have got it wrong, and you'll be in a position to talk a lot more knowledgeably than perhaps you would have done if you hadn't read the book. That's not to cast aspersions on the research that I'm sure many of our listeners undertake. It's just to say that this book is a very, very useful piece of resource material, and I would certainly recommend, if you haven't already got yourself a copy, then please do so at the earliest opportunity. You won't regret it.
And this is what I'm glossing too, is that there were the rumblings of a caliphate, and it did start in the 1990s, but initially did it not start out with Al-Qaeda, with Osama bin Laden, and who was rather reticent in declaring a caliphate because, like you mentioned, it was too soon, and it would reach too much attention in Western circles, in particular the United States, when we had a somewhat strong president, and that would be George W. Bush. And so he held off on this. But the leader, the founder of Islamic State, Abu Musab al-Sakari, he was such a devout Muslim that he was determined that it would go forth. Now, this guy is quite a character, too, this Abu Musab al-Sakari. He became a devout Muslim while he was in, here we go, while he was in prison for drugs and sexual assault. And like Tim and I mentioned, Osama bin Laden, he did hesitate to found a caliphate for fear of American power to lay siege on the Islamic State. Now, the word assassin derives from the word for the followers of a medieval Persian ruler who built a Potakim, Islamic paradise, to recruit murderers with girls and hashish. So that's a tiny little. Well, that's a huge sidebar. The word assassin. I just had to throw that in there because doesn't it make sense, Tim? Goodness sakes.
Yeah. I mean, it's well worth mentioning it because the one of the accounts of the assassins comes from details from Marco Polo's travels. He was a traveller back in the 12th, 13th century, and he described this sect on his travels in between his home in Italy and on the route to China and Mongolia. So it is a very interesting account of the establishment of the assassins, and of course that's the group that gave English the word assassin, and it's derived from the word try and get this out in one go, hashashin, or hashish smokers.
That's it.
And it was the name given to the group on the basis of stories about its leader. I won't go into it in too much detail. We might touch on it again, but it is part of the story that leads up to the formation of the Islamic State.
I find this interesting, too. It seemed like there was virtually a battle of wills between Osama bin Laden and Sakari. And it seemed that Sakari was garnering a lot more support and sympathy because he seemed to be very pious. He was an emotional man, and he was committed to the well-being of the men under his command. And these men were aware that he was one of them who had come from a similar background. And that won him a lot of loyalty. And that, of course, rivaled that of Osama bin Laden, who was seen as a wealthy, aristocratic Saudi. And he placed a distance between him and his rank-and-file jihadist, unlike Sakari. This was never a problem for Sakari. He was a man of the people. And thus, because of his humble beginnings, like the vast majority that we see via the foot soldiers of folks, and this is the foot soldiers of Islamic State, not the doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs that they employ as well. But in recruiting those to join the Islamic State, Sakari was he was the poster child for recruitment because he could connect with those that were joining the Islamic State. Would that be fair to say, Tim?
Yeah, I think it would. As you say, going back to when Osama bin Laden was the driving force between on behalf of the organisation that existed 15, 20 years ago, Zarqawi was really instrumental in creating out of all the disparate groups that had previously existed, creating the one group which would then go on, even after Zarqawi's death, to declare itself as the new caliphate. I mean, the actual declaration of the caliphate didn't take place until the middle of 2014, but obviously there was a lot of planning on the run-up to that, and it was always envisioned by people like Zarqawi that there would be, at some point, there would be a caliphate established, and they calculated, or people like Zarqawi and the people around him calculated, that once the caliphate was established, then it would be an unstoppable force, providing it was created at the right time. And of course, the right time was not when George W. Bush was president, but when it became quite obvious to everybody when Barack Hussein Obama came to the presidency that he was not going to make any serious steps to oppose the formation of the caliphate at all. And whether that was just through being a weak president or a president who wasn't particularly knowledgeable, or heaven forfend, a president who actually had Muslim sympathies, well, what a strange thing to say, I hear you all say. It was one of these things or something else. I believe that the Islamic State decided that this was the right time to continue Zarqawi's work, lay out the timetable for the formation of a caliphate, and to attack the West while it was weak. And there's no question about it. We have leaders now in virtually every Western country who are too weak to resist the rise of the caliphate and its subsequent progression. I mean, other things have helped. It's helped that the caliphate has been able to take control of large amounts of territory, of large sums of money, billions upon billions of dollars effectively have fallen under the control of the Islamic State, and all sorts of military hardware, some of them donated, believe it or not, by the United States, who thought they were arming a completely different group altogether, and some of it, of course, taken from the military in Iraq and Syria, who in several cases just ran away when they were approached by the Islamic State. You know, even though I can think of one instance when the Iraqi army ran away when they outnumbered the Islamic State rebels by about 10-1, and they ran away and just effectively handed over all the military hardware that had been donated by the United States. So the Islamic State has waited a long time for the opportunity to put its plans into practice. I mean, we knew many years ago that this was the ultimate goal, and I don't know whether it was just a question of the various administrations not believing that they were serious or what, but things have been proceeding pretty much according to the timetable that was drawn up about 10 years ago when Zarqawi, just before Zarqawi was killed. So they seem to be much better at planning and timing than the United States and other Western countries have been in responding to the threat. But, maybe we shouldn't be surprised, because the political correctness and multiculturalism that's been in the ascendant for many years before that is taking its toll on Western leaders. They don't understand the magnitude of the threat, or if they do, they choose not to confront it for various reasons. Not the least, of course, is the fact that they've now got substantial quantities of Muslims in their own countries, and foolishly enough, they have given those Muslims votes, and so they are reduced to chasing Muslim votes in order that they might stay in power. I mean, there's just all sorts of factors which have come together in a perfect storm.
Well, the one thing too that confuses me is that Islamism They are renowned for their patience, and they have been hanging about for 1,400 years to establish. They attempted the caliphate via the Ottoman Empire, which was, of course, quashed in because of the First World War that the Ottoman Empire finally collapsed. But they are renowned for their patience. Why all of a sudden are we seeing this surge in the brutality? And I think the most infamous example of what we were exposed to in terms of Islamic State was, of course, the beheading of Nicholas Berg, an American hostage, in May of 2004. Now, why do they need this brutality? Why do they not still have the patience? Because we have the watches, they have the time. They are winning via the wound. Muammar Gaddafi was right. They don't need a sword. They're winning. Like Tim, Dave, who are you? Who am I speaking with? No. But as Jeff brought up on his program last night at EDL Radio, is that we are seeing the influx of the Mohammedans in Europe. And we don't have much time left, but they have all the time in the world. Why all of a sudden this huge surge in the utter brutality when they can wait 2, maybe 3 generations and declare Europe an Islamic state?
Well, I think there's a couple of factors here. One is the timing, and the other is the extent of the brutality. And I don't think one is necessarily connected to the other. If I can just to recap on my last point, which is to say that we've effectively we have created, and when I say we have created, we in the West are partially responsible for what's happening because we've created the conditions for this perfect storm to happen. The caliphate, of course, is something that all Muslims, all devout Muslims, aspire to. We in the West have pretended that it's of no consequence, that it's of no seriousness, and that Muslims don't really want a caliphate. Well, guess what? They do. The devout Muslims have to work towards making Islam powerful wherever they might happen to be in life, with the ultimate goal of taking over the entire world. And by taking over the entire world, that means under the jurisdiction of a caliphate run by a caliph. That's the ideal form of Islamic government as far as devout Muslims are concerned. So why didn't they wait another 2 or 3 generations? Well, I guess like Muslims everywhere, they looked for their opportunity. They made their plans, and they decided that this was the right time to strike because the West was very weak, and they were presented with some, you might say almost serendipitous circumstances which allowed them to take vast quantities of land, vast quantities of money. The internet and social media, of course, played their part, things that didn't exist 20 years ago. So they were able to not only make gains with land and money, but advertise all this and effectively use the internet for recruitment. And they did it so effectively. I mean, as anybody who's been looking at events over the past couple of years will know, they have produced some very slick PR material in terms of videos and so on, in order to in order to recruit people for the cause.
It's movie quality, is what it is. These videos that they're putting together. That's a really interesting point that you bring up, Tim, though, is that we are in a position of vulnerability right now, and they are seeing weak governments. And the latest government to join in the weakness, the shallow gene pool, as it were, would be Canada under the helmsmanship of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And it's true. They are seeing opportunities left, right, and center, and they can strike. But I find this rather interesting, though, with the alliance with Al-Qaeda. And Zakari, he pledged his loyalty and that his organization would follow Osama bin Laden. And thus he renamed his group Tanzim Qudat al-Jihad fi Bilad al-Rafidain, Al-Qaeda in the time of Land of Two Rivers. Soon it became popularly known as Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or AQI. And when Osama bin Laden renamed his group, and then it was shortened to Al-Qaeda, and that Zakari pledged his loyalty to Osama bin Laden. It seemed, though, that in the end it became a splinter group. And I know that Zakari, the eager little fella that he is, despite his declaration of allegiance to Al-Qaeda, he stressed the importance of Muslim unity, something that would also be a priority of the Islamic State. Now, this declaration began with an epigraph from the Quran: "Hold fast to the rope of God, and you shall not be divided." And that's from chapter 3, verse 103. But then, added to that, "Praise be to God, the cherisher and sustainer of the worlds, and let there be no aggression except upon the oppressors." And that meaning there be no aggression between Muslims. But that didn't quite turn out that way. I think Zakari was getting a little impatient with the tactics of Al-Qaeda, and thus he was starting to engage Islamic State in committing atrocities to thump the point across and, yes, take advantage of the weak Western governments that we see. Now, I know Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, they had a falling out over this because Al-Qaeda was like, "Whoa, dude, you know what? You're really pushing the envelope here." And we were, I believe at one point Al-Qaeda was on a huge coup to convert a whole whackload of Catholics or something, and here's Islamic State running around the hills beheading people, and Al-Qaeda's going, "Dude, not cool, man." Like,
yes.
They just didn't agree on tactics. It's not that Al-Qaeda was afraid of Islamic State. They had a political falling out.
I think that's fair to say. And there were probably people within Al-Qaeda who thought, let's wait 2 or 3 generations until Muslims make up a significant percentage in places like Europe and the United States. And then when we make our move, it will be that much more effective. But the thing is, there's too many imponderables. What might happen is there might be in 2 or 3 generations' time, there might be much stronger Western governments. The whole notion of political correctness and multiculturalism might have evaporated, and I certainly hope it has evaporated in 2 or 3 generations' time. Otherwise, we really will be screwed. But so there were other groups people like Zakari in particular, who said, no, we could wait forever for the most favourable conditions. Conditions are sufficiently favourable now, with weak Western governments, hamstrung by political correctness and multiculturalism, an opportunity for us to make huge gains in land and wealth by seizing oil wells and oil revenues, and just simple bank robbery. When they first went into the town of Mosul, I think they took over the central bank and got about, I think it was a couple of $1 billion, something like that, in cash. So they're the richest. By striking when they did, they kick-started the caliphate off to a really good start. Lots of money, lots of potential oil revenues, lots of land available to them, the internet available for them to recruit an endless stream of young people to their cause, and weak Western governments. You could arguably wait a little longer and perhaps you might have some more ideal conditions, but then again, maybe you might not. And that rather brings me to the second point, which you were asking about a moment ago, Cal, which concerns the brutality of ISIS. Well, let's not forget that Islam is founded on terror. Islam was not founded by people who went out and about with copies of the Quran and knocked on doors and said, "Hey, you really, like Jehovah's Witnesses, right? Knock on doors and say, well, you really want to have a look at this, and you'll be convinced by the beauty of the Arabic language and so on." Well, no, that isn't how most people become converted to Islam. Most people become converted to Islam. That's assuming they're not born into it, okay, which is a separate thing altogether. But they convert to Islam because they see it as a bigger threat to their lives than if they don't convert to Islam. And that's how societies in the past have become 100% Islamic, because when Muslims feel they're powerful enough to take over a given area or a given community, they issue ultimatums. They say, you will either convert or we will kill you. And the only alternative is, if you happen to be Christian or Jewish, we'll allow you to live as long as you pay an extortionate tax in order to keep us Muslims in the style to which we have become accustomed, which of course is why they're so thrilled to bits with our welfare systems here in the West, because it's as if they were tailor-made to give Muslims the jizya that they so rightfully they see as being rightfully theirs. But the brutality is something that comes as part and parcel of Islam. We really oughtn't to be surprised at the extent of the brutality, and there are no depths to which they will not sink. But Islam has always been like that, and you only have to read the accounts of what was done in the past, and this is, accounts from the Islamic texts, where you can quite easily see that the imposition of Islam on people who might have been initially unwilling was absolutely relentless, and people realized that if they didn't convert, they would either have to flee or be killed, and that's exactly what's happening today in Iraq and Syria. And the more terror you can exert, the more effective you will be in gaining your converts for Islam. So slice off a few heads. It's good for business. Burn people alive, not a problem. How many other ways can we think of killing people today? It just isn't really an issue, because it will be held, whatever the depravity that they're prepared to sink to, it will be seen as a great thing by other Muslims who like to look for sources of strength to follow. So we shouldn't be surprised that Islamic State is as brutal as it is. I mean, we consider ourselves here in the West to be very advanced and very civilized, and to a certain extent we have given up day-to-day brutality and entrusted those powers to the state in order to keep us safe. I mean, in the past, each individual citizen would have had a sword or a pistol or a combination of the two, which he would carry with him at all times.
Yeah.
And we've given that up so that the state will keep us safe. But of course, if the state then decides it doesn't want to keep the population safe, as we have seen in recent years, and specifically, I could point to specific things like the New Year's attacks here all across Germany and Austria and Finland and so on. If it becomes obvious that the state is no longer willing to keep the population safe, then the whole social contract is likely to fall apart. People will start.
Well, this is where I'm having problems. Is that they don't have to necessarily, yes, of course, we know that it's a brutal regime. We know that it's a brutal entity and ideology, and it is based on violence. Yes, we know that. But why they need it in this day and age is what eludes me. What eludes me as well is that I don't think that they need to engage in these terror tactics any longer, because the West is rolling over. Sorry, but that's my opinion right now. I'm quite jaundiced, and that I cannot trust our respective Western governments to take care of us. And they know that. I mean, they're Islamists. They smell blood. They know when there is appeasement going on. I mean, look at what happened in, I believe it was Philadelphia. A police officer was shot by a person saying that he was doing it in the name of the Islamic State. And the police commissioner said, this guy said, he was doing it because he was doing it in the name of Islam. And the mayor comes out and says, this has nothing to do with Islam. See? They're winning the hearts and minds of the adherents of Islamic State, and they don't need to blow us up any longer. We're rolling over. Come and get us. We're here. Convert us, or we'll die. Why do you
Well,
need to blow up my house? Why do you need to blow up my business? Just let me pay the jizya tax. Leave me alone with my steel-belted radio tires and my TV, and I won't cause any more problems. Just leave me alone. Take my money. Here. Take my firstborn. I've already offered it to you via my weak government. So why the hell do they have to kill us en masse?
Well, quite simply because they don't think we're terrorized enough. Most people go about their lives in Western countries as if none of this existed. You know, they're very narrowly focused because maybe they've got an important job they need to keep control of. They have to provide a roof over the heads of themselves and their families and put food on the table. And to think about Islam is really hard work, and unless there's an immediate payoff, you know, most people don't want to do it. Now, of course, an immediate payoff is if somebody comes to your door armed with scimitars and an AK-47 and says, you know, you don't do what we ask you, we're going to kill you, you know, then that will change your focus. But until that actually happens, I'm sure the Islamic State have made the calculation that they need to keep on terrorizing Western societies and Western governments until there is no more resistance. And you can read as much into the Islamics where they say strike off strike at the necks and the fingertips of the non-believers, strike terror into the hearts of the non-believers, make ready your steeds of war and sow terror and so on. I mean, that's respectively Quran 47.4, 812 and 860, but there are numerous other examples where Muslims are enjoined to instill a state of terror into the infidels that are still out there and still haven't converted to Islam, and that will keep going until such time as Islam is totally crushed. And I'm talking about Islam now, not the Islamic State, because the driving force behind the Islamic State, believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, is Islam, not radical Islam, not fundamentalist Islam, not a particularly nasty brand of Islam that only a few twisted individuals follow. The problem is Islam, and the jihadis that follow, that have established the Islamic State and fight for Allah in the name of Islam and jihad, they are doing it for the cause of Islam. Let there be no mistake. And if somebody says, well, there are peaceful Muslims that we must keep on side, you've got to remember that every Muslim is peaceful until they're not. And of course, once the jihad comes to town, you will find exactly how true that is. And it's something that many communities have found to their cost. We know, for example, as the Islamic State has made its progress through Iraq and Syria, that communities which previously lived in peace side by side, I'm talking like Christian and Jewish and Muslim communities, all of a sudden when the jihad came to town and Muslims were instructed to kill their neighbours, they did so without a second thought, and they will do that here. There's no question that if you're a devout Muslim, you know that the time may well come when you're going to be asked to kill your neighbour. And even if neighbour is just going about doing their business and behaving in a perfectly innocent way, if the jihad comes to town and you're instructed to kill your neighbour, you will do it. If you're a devout Muslim, you will do it without a second thought. And that's the danger we currently face. So when you're saying, why do they have to be so brutal? Well, the answer is it's within Islam. They are instructed to sow terror into the hearts of the infidel until such time as the whole world is ruled by Allah or on behalf of Allah.
And we know that. We know all of that. We have been reiterating this point on numerous radio programs, not just you and myself, but all the counter-jihadists that have radio programs have driven that point home. And it's a very important point. But in this particular segment, I really would like to concentrate on what happened between Al-Qaeda and the surgence of the Islamic State. Now, what happened in early of 2014 is that Al-Qaeda attempted to reassert control over Islamic State. Osama bin Laden had been killed in May of 2011, but the organization continued to operate under the leadership of his successor, Ayman al-Zawahiri, a scholarly Egyptian eye surgeon who had served as bin Laden's personal physician. Now, Zawahiri demanded that Islamic State stand down and lead the jihad in Syria to another Al-Qaeda allied group, Jabhat al-Nusra, or Nusra, my apologies, folks. When Islamic State did not comply, Al-Qaeda made the announcement on February 2nd of 2014, quote, Islamic State is not a branch of the Quwat al-Jihad group. We have no organizational relationships with it, and our group is not responsible for its actions. Okay, folks, now bear with me. What I just quoted to you, does that not sound like a political organization that is kind of like distancing itself from another more radical political organization? Oh, of course it does. Islam is political. But just to wrap this up in a neat little bow, now this formal break came along after the alliance had ceased to exist anywhere but on paper. Islamic State hadn't even used the name Al-Qaeda in over 7 years. Nonetheless, Western leaders and the mainstream media made all they could out of the split between Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. Party, party, party. Oh, they were having huge parties. Yay! Now, in the midst of its lengthy campaign to convince Americans that the Islamic State was not Islamic at all, the Obama administration and its willing enablers in the mainstream media welcomed the rift between the two terror organizations as proof for its theory that Islamic State was distorting and hijacking the religion of peace. This is what Secretary of State John Kerry said in 2014. They're more extreme than Al-Qaeda. Oh, gee, I don't think so. I think it's quite relative. Their tactics may be different, but each group is equally extreme. It's a power struggle between the two. Tim, I implore you.
Well, yes. I mean, I think when Secretary of State John Kerry opens his mouth, you better just be there with a good dictionary, because he might think that he means something, or you might think he means something. He probably means something quite different. The number of times that man has opened his mouth and come out with outright falsehoods about the nature of the enemy that we face, it makes you wonder whether he's just clueless, or whether he's been misinformed, or whether he is actually on the side of our enemies. And let's be quite clear: the enemy of humanity in this case at this time is Islam, without a doubt. Radical Islam, as the politicians and the mainstream media like to phrase it, it isn't viewed that way by Muslims at all. President Erdogan of Turkey, I think, once memorably said that Islam is Islam, and that's it. All this talk of radical Islam and fundamentalist Islam is misleading. Islam is Islam, and you can't really argue with what he's saying there. And of course, when John Kerry says things to the contrary, you do have to wonder about whether he's clueless or misinformed, or he's actually working for the enemy. The entire administration at the moment would appear to be on the side of the enemy against the interests of America as a whole. I actually saw a very interesting quotation from I think it was an article by Douglas Murray that was in that came out today, and he referred to a quotation that says, how can you tell what makes up a bureaucracy? And the part of the answer was that if you imagine a cabal of your worst enemies that have gathered together and have taken over that bureaucracy, that will very frequently explain what the bureaucracy is doing. Now, that seems to me to be certainly true of the Obama administration. They've been taken over by interests that are completely opposed to the interests of the United States. The same thing with Europe, with the European Union. You could argue that the European Union has been taken over by interests that are completely against the interests of most of the indigenous population of Europe. So it doesn't actually seem like a bad quotation. I'm going to see if I can find it and drop it into the chat room. But we have a serious case of denial about the true nature of the Islamic State and of the true nature of Islam, that is going to be our downfall unless it is corrected very, very soon. I mean, this is the one reason that I'm so impressed with what Donald Trump has had to say in recent weeks about the possibility of closing the doors of America to Muslim immigration until, in his words, we figure out what the hell is going on. Now, all right, you and I and the people in the chat room probably have figured out what's going on, and I would say that our analysis is pretty accurate because we've done the appropriate research. But there's an awful lot of people out there who don't realise what's going on, and the best thing to do, as Confucius once reportedly said, is when in hole, stop digging. So
digging.
That's it. Stop Muslim immigration. But the administration seems to be entirely clueless. And as I say, if they may present themselves as our friends and not our enemies, but you have to ask yourself if there was an enemy cabal right at the heart of the Obama administration and the European Union, what would they be doing differently? And the answer is nothing. You know, they are enabling our enemies, both sides of the Atlantic, to take over and destroy the civilization that our ancestors and our forefathers worked for.
Well, I think that it's a changing society in which we live too, and that we are allowing this to occur. I mean, we used to have real leaders in the past, and historically we had Winston Churchill, we had Thomas Jefferson. Recent history, we had the likes of Ronald Reagan, and even more recently, the likes of Stephen Harper of Canada, that understood the threat of Islam. I don't think that these current leaders and appeasers are ignorant to the ambitions of Islam. I think that they are engaged in dimitude, and they seem to think that there is still a ghost of a chance that we can win over the hearts and minds of these Islamics. And Paige just got into the chat room. She didn't get sound, so I directed her to the embedded box, and she's got sound. Paige, fantastic. Yay! There you go. But it is true in that Islam smells blood. Islam doesn't negotiate. Like, Islam smells blood and goes in for the kill. That's what Islam is.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So what is it with our governments? Yeah, like, do they not have enough advisors about them to inform them? Like, Mr. President, have you read the philosophy of the Islamic State? Have you read their mission statement? Do you understand exactly the ambitions of the Islamic State, sir? Really, really, do you? Do you really understand? This guy knows exactly the ambitions of the United States. Barack Hussein Obama is probably, though, the poorest example to use because he is an Islamic sympathizer. He's one of the world leaders that still uses the phrase ISIL. Goodness sake. He knows what's going on.
Yes, ISIL, of course, which stands for the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, is totally different. ISIS, which is effectively the Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham, or broadly speaking, Iraq and Syria. Now, when President Obama refers to Islamic State as ISIL, he's actually sending a message to the people behind the Islamic State to say that I recognise that your claim to territory doesn't just extend to Iraq and Syria, it extends to the entire eastern seaboard of the Mediterranean, and curling round the top bit into Turkey and curling round the bottom bit into Egypt. That I'm recognising is the true extent of the entity that you have created. So he's actually sending a message of aid and comfort to our enemies when he refers to the Islamic State as ISIL instead of ISIS. And I don't think you can emphasise that too highly. He's doing it in quite a clever way because he assumes that nobody else will understand the importance of what he says when he says ISIL rather than ISIS. But there is a very big difference, and if you send that message to your enemies, you are guilty of treason in as much as you're giving aid and comfort to the enemy.
Absolutely, and that's exactly it. He's offering code speak, and Aiden Comfort. Do you want to take a bit of a break? We're at the top of the hour.
Yeah, sounds great. Have you got a cracking bit of music for us, Cal?
I do. I've got something here, and this gentleman has been on the program in the past, and this is Joe Dan Gorman. So, see you guys back here in 3.5 moments.
JoeDanMedia.com.
And welcome back, everybody. You're listening to RFB Radio, and Joel's not done.
Determined to destroy us, and we have no hope of negotiating a peace. Unless that changes, we are justified in doing anything we can to survive.
Can't believe I keep forgetting that end. Editing the show. But welcome back, everybody, to RFB Radio. Born of Blood and Slaughter is the topic tonight. And this is courtesy of Red Fox Radio, heard on Blog Talk Radio sometimes, but always heard on Pundit Press, SHR Media, and Spreaker. Thank you all for joining us. We have an underground professor joining us in the studio, as well as our very own Movin. And Prof, you had a kick-ass show last night. I really enjoyed that. I listened to the rest in archive once I figured out how to open up the little embed box. It was fantastic, Prof. But we have Bigfoot joining us in the chat room as well. Bigfoot's place at blogspot.com. Please check him out. My nephew, LSU Jeff, and the beautiful Paige Weeks. But Tim, I swear. What is it with Islamic State? Are they engaging? I was when I was reading this chapter, I was I was rather amazed that they are so PR sensitive, press release sensitive. They seem to think that they still have an image to present. What kind of image are they presenting?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is all about the PR as far as Islamic State is concerned, and don't forget they think about image in a slightly different way than we do here. We if we want to present a good image, if you and I wanted to present a good image, we wouldn't go around slaughtering people or participating in barbaric practices because that would make us look bad. But of course, those things are seen as very positive attributes in the Islamic world. There's nothing better in the Islamic world than to slaughter your enemies in such a way as to strike terror into their hearts. That's all part and parcel of Islam, and if you can spread that message effectively, and of course the internet and social media like Facebook and Twitter and all the other media platforms provide the ideal opportunity for Islamic State to do just that. And they put a lot of resources into recruiting people who are very, very good, very talented at projecting just the right message to attract I won't use the terms young and vulnerable people, but there are plenty of young people who are looking for a cause. I mean, that's just part and parcel of youth. They don't have to be Muslims to exhibit that characteristic. But Islamic State has a PR machine which appeals very strongly to that vulnerable group insofar as it's effectively saying, look, here we are. We're running a state on the lines of good old-fashioned Islamic values, just like the Islamic prophet Muhammad would have done back in the 7th century. And of course, anybody who knows anything about the Islamic theology and the Islamic prophet Muhammad will know that the Quran says that Muhammad is the most perfect example of mankind, and he is to be emulated at every possible opportunity. It says so many places in the Quran. I'm thinking specifically of chapter 33, verse 21, but it does say this elsewhere in the Quran, al-insan al-kamil, the perfect man in Arabic. And if there are young Muslims who are living in Western countries and they don't particularly like the Western way of life, then that is going to seem quite attractive to people who really do want to follow Islam as it was practiced in the days of the Islamic prophet Muhammad. So having a good PR machine is an extremely important part of their recruiting process. And ultimately, if we want to get rid of Islamic State, we're going to have to get rid of or discredit the PR section of the operation to the point where people won't want to join the Islamic State, or they won't want to wage jihad in their own countries, because they'll see that it is in fact against the whole concept of humanity. It's very cleverly packaged, but the message nonetheless is that if you are a devout Muslim, you're declaring war on the rest of humanity. Now, when people fully understand that Islam is the enemy of humanity, then eventually it will cease to be a great power in the world, and people will discard it, and it'll dissolve into dust. But that time is not yet upon us, and the PR machine still continues to attract young, vulnerable people to the cause of jihad.
What I want to switch gears with them, just for a quick sec, and get back to what you were discussing there, is that according to the Quran, the Holy Quran, as Barack Hussein Obama likes to pronounce it, is that this particular so-called religion does not condone the killing of innocents. And President Obama said a number of years back, no religion condones the killing of innocents, but Sakari came out and said, hey, look, the goal must be pursued, even if it means to accomplish it in its effect. Women, children, any other passive category specified by our jurisprudence. Jurisprudence, see? They are, they're judge, jury, and executioner. Like, by their jurisprudence. Is that so? Does that not, kind of contravene a little passage in the Quran? Oh, I don't know, verse 5, chapter 5, verse 32, Tim?
Well, 532, of course, refers to as if a Muslim slays somebody, it's like he slew.
I can barely hear you, boss.
Oh, okay. Just 1 second. Yeah, there we go. That's better. 532 says, amongst other things, that if a Muslim slays one person, it's like he slays the whole of humanity. And if he saves one person, it's like he saves the whole of humanity. But of course, as is made clear in the next verse, 533, you just can't take 532 out of context like that. It refers only to Muslims, and it doesn't refer to Jews and Christians.
Okay. I'm getting this now. The abrogation factor is alive and well with Islamic State. We'll ignore 532, but we'll move right into 533, and that includes anybody who stands in our bloody way, because that's also in the Quran. Now, President Obama, this guy just doesn't shut up. He went on to say on killing Muslims, the vast majority of Islamic State, or he calls them ISIL, the vast majority of Islamic State's victims have been Muslim. Yes, of course they have been, because they're ignoring their very own Holy Quran. Terrorist master Sakari, he had to say this. Although spilling sacred Muslims' blood is a grave offense, it is not only permissible, but it is mandated in order to prevent more serious adversity from happening, stalling, or abandoning jihad, that is. So, guys, you really have to get this book and study this for yourself. From what I can gather from this is that they are, well, of course, they're a bunch of, raving lunatics, but they're violating their own principles. For what purpose? The caliphate, of course. But they are in such a violation, and our world leaders can't see this? Like, my goodness. I mean, these are simple passages out of the Quran, Tim.
Well, they are, and when you're talking about verse 532 and verse 533, it's not so much abrogation in that case. It's actually just taking something out of context and saying, well, 532 represents what Muslims think about killing anybody, anybody at all. But 533 makes it clear that they're only talking about Muslims when they're talking about saving the whole of humanity. They're only talking about Muslims. They're not talking about non-Muslims. So that's not so much abrogation, although abrogation is a concept which, when applied, makes a great deal of sense.
You're right. Abrogation is more or less when they technically switch things up, but I got you.
Yeah. Well, when you've got when you've got something like that, and our world leaders willfully ignore it, I mean, they must have advisors who say to them, well, what really is happening within Islam is this. They are following the Quran. They're doing Islamically correct things. And if you get leaders who are so blinkered that they say, well, they might say they're killing in the name of Allah, but they're not really. Like the mayor of Philadelphia, for example, that was a classic one. This Muslim attacks a police officer shouting Allah Akbar. When he's arrested, he says, I did it for Allah to further the cause of Islam. I forget what his exact words were. And the mayor of Philadelphia says, oh, no, you didn't. And he says, oh, yes, I did. And he says, oh, no, you didn't.
You didn't.
And
yes,
the denial is unreal. And of course, every single Western country has leaders who are in this state of denial. I could give you 100 examples. I'll stick with just that one and one other, which is when Michael Adebolajo slaughtered Lee Rigby on the streets of Woolwich back in 2014. 2013. He quoted 9:29. He quoted chapter 9, verse 29, which basically was the justification for doing what he did. And yeah, Islamically speaking, he was absolutely right. He did have Islamic justification, killing the soldiers of the infidel forces wherever they might be found. But of course, Cameron stood up and says this has got nothing to do with Islam, and people who hadn't done the research believed him because, he's our Prime Minister. He's got to be telling the truth, right? Well, wrong. Mm-hmm. When it comes to Islam, our leaders are not telling the truth at all. But you do. This is why it's so important to understand the various aspects of Islam and why Muslims frequently quote verses like 532, because it makes it sound like Islam is a really peaceful religion. But they don't tell you about 533, which makes it clear that they're discriminating against Jews and Christians and non-Muslims. And that is a constant throughout the Quran when Muslims quote, here's another one, chapter 2, verse 216, which basically says, to you, your religion, to me, my religion. Well, that sounds nice and peaceful. We're all tolerant and forgiving of each other's religious beliefs. How nice is that? But of course, when it's coupled with the verse of the sword, which abrogates, now that there is an example of abrogation, 216 abrogated by the verse of the sword, chapter 9, verse 5, which basically says it's okay to kill Jews and Christians if they're impeding the progress of Islam in any way. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but Muslims will never tell you this. They'll just say, well, the peaceful verse is the one that really encompasses the spirit of Islam, and anybody who tells you otherwise is just a greasy Islamophobe. But of course, what Muslims tell you about Islam is completely at odds with the truth. And our leaders, if they don't realise this, then they ought to. I fear that it is the case that maybe they do realise it, or they're letting on that they know, well, they're not letting on that they know more than they actually do. And they choose not to, either through fear or through losing Muslim votes, which is a terrible, terrible position for the West to be in, to have leaders who would sacrifice the integrity on the basis of appeasing Muslims and putting our indigenous populations at risk. It's an appalling thing. I sincerely hope when sanity returns to the political landscape, we will have a series of trials not unlike Nuremberg after World War II, and we'll be taking these treasonous weasels and hanging them from the appropriate lamppost. So, all right, I'm deviating from the topic slightly, but when we're talking about what, you'll have to excuse me, I do this now and again, when you're talking about what the various verses in the Quran actually say, you have to be very careful because they frequently do not mean what Muslims tell you they mean. And it's for the two reasons that they're being taken, those verses could be being taken out of context, or they could be abrogated verses. And in either instance, it gives you a totally misleading view of what the Quran is all about and what Islam is all about by extension. And of course, by extension from that, what the Islamic State is all about, because the Islamic State is based on Islam.
We're pretty much getting ready to shut this chapter down, but I wanted to get to this in the book, and I think that this is very important for the listeners to also grasp onto, is that we were discussing the infighting that goes on amongst the Mohammedans themselves. These are big players, though, that we're discussing. These are huge players. And I just want to share something out of this book. And this involves Osama bin Laden's lieutenant, and his name is Ayman al-Zawahiri. Ayman al-Zawahiri, he wrote a letter in 2009, or 2005, July 9th of 2005, in which he laid out al-Qaeda's four-step plan for reviving the caliphate. Zawahiri, who became the leader of al-Qaeda after bin Laden's death, praised Zakari's successes and very gently, he did write a letter gently remonstrating him for doing things that could turn public opinion against him. Now, Zawahiri is exceedingly polite and deferential in the letter, but cannot help allowing a hint of condescension to slip through now and again. Now, this is what This is what Zawahiri wrote. I'm a little thrown off my game. Sorry, guys. I want to be the first to congratulate you for what God has blessed you with in terms of fighting battles in the hearts of the Islamic world, which was formerly the field for major battles in Islam's history and what is now the place for the greatest battle of Islam in this in this era. And what will happen according to what appeared in the hadiths of the Messenger of God about the epic battles between Islam and atheism. He praises Zakari in fulsome terms, writing that God has blessed you and your brothers, while many of the Muslim mujahideen had longed for the blessings, and that is jihad in the heart of the Islamic world. He has, in addition to that, granted you superiority over the idolatrous, infidel, traitorous apostates, and those turncoat deviants. Only then does he begin to upbraid Zakari gently for the ferocity of his jihad in Iraq, and he warns. Sorry, got to put something out here. Among the things which the feelings of the Muslim populace who love and support you will never find palatable also are the scenes of slaughtering the hostages. You shouldn't be deceived by the praise of some of the zealous young men and their description of you as the sheikha of the slaughterers, etc. They do not express the general view of the admirer and the supporter of the resistance in Iraq, and of you in particular by the favor and blessings of God. So what Ayman al-Zawahiri is saying, the bespectacled Kara surgeon, is saying, like, tone it down, bro. Like, you're giving us a real bad rap here. We're onto something good. We've got all these weak governments. You really don't need to engage in the atrocities and the eye candy for the idolatrous, the eye candy for those that emulate to be with you. Now, Zawahiri, he anticipated Zakari's objection, and it came. And your response, well, true might be, why shouldn't we sow terror into the hearts of the Crusaders and their helpers? And isn't the destruction of the villages and the cities on the heads of their inhabitants more cruel than slaughtering? And aren't the cluster bombs and the 7-ton bombs and the depleted uranium bombs crueler than slaughtering? See where he's going with this? Defense. Mm-hmm. And isn't killing by torture crueler than slaughtering? And isn't violating the honor of men and women more painful and more destructive than slaughtering? Holy me. And these are Quranic references that Zawahiri knew Zakari would understand. And he talked about these, chapter 8, verse 60. Strike the heart and terror into the enemies of Allah. Yeah, exactly. Like, these guys are more or less on the same page, but dude over here, Zawahiri, he wants it to slow down, bro. Is that the impression I'm to understand, Tim? Oh, where'd Tim go? Did I lose Tim? Uh-oh. While I wait for Tim to get back. Yeah, this is, These are two power players talking about what to do with the PR movement within the caliphate ambitions. And I lost him completely. But, I do have somebody here that would like to join me, and that is the underground professor. Hey, Prof. How you doing?
Hola, mi amiga.
Hey!
Tim went to go get his thesaurus, so he said he'd be back.
Or he went to get me. Yeah, that's what he's doing. He's at
Webster's,
the bookstore right now
Urban
picking up my very own copy of my own thesaurus.
Oh,
how are you, Prof?
I'm doing well. You liked the show last night, huh? My troll show?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Good to have Agador back, too.
Yeah. You know what? I missed that dude over the holidays.
Yep.
Missed you, too.
But he's got the right idea, I think, about just going into a coma and leaving all this for a week or so every now and then.
Yeah.
Well,
I
was called all kinds of things last night, and accused of being a Klan member and being associated with NAMBLA.
Oh, you know what? I was frantically trying to get there, and I finally had to figure out this sound business about clicking on that little box with the arrow coming out to get the embedded box so that I could listen to the program. Like, I don't know. Is Blog Talk Radio reinventing the wheel? I don't know. But do tell us what happened on your show last night, which accorded you such vitriol.
Oh, I'm not quite sure. I was talking a lot about Islam, of course, and Marvel Comics introducing a new heroine. Ms. Marvel is going to be an Egyptian or Pakistani female with shape-shifting abilities.
Oh, isn't that lovely? Yes. Yeah, Marvel Comics and the new protagonist. Yeah, and her lovely Islamic family. Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah, the funny thing is the picture of her on the issue number 1 is her without a hijab, no burqa, no headscarf, and textbooks in her hand. And I'm thinking, and she's Islamic? Yeah, I mean, come on. But they're trying to make her an American Islam, and so that's their goal. I actually think it's a good idea because I think it will expose a lot of people who don't know about it, and it will give people like you and to a lesser extent people like me fodder to educate. And so this is just another. So this is like having Obama in for another 4 years. Radio gold.
Yeah.
It was interesting. I was even offered to commit anatomical practices, which I find impossible, but I would participate if I could. And, but it was bizarre.
I think I think it's interesting that you brought up the Marvel Comics protagonist. Remember the last heroine of that particular Marvel comic segment? She was a blonde bombshell wearing virtually nothing, and now they introduced this character, and she's practically wearing bobby socks with glasses and unkempt hair. She looks like a square pig.
Exactly. It's like, what are you talking about? It's like 1950s Muslim polymorph. But, I think there's something that is underplay in here, and it's that her power is a polymorph, which is usually reserved for the bad guys in the comics. But I think with our society being transgendering, if you will, no one really knows who they are anymore. You've got homosexuality that's rampant. You've got transsexuality, which is rampant. You've got cross-dressing and all these other words that we, have to figure out now what they mean, and they change what we used to use them as. And so I wonder if our children, being an old fart, I'm out of touch with, with anybody that's over the age of like 12, because all I ever see are the children that Santa sees. But I'm starting to wonder if we have raised a generation who just absolutely has no concept of their sexual roles in society, the proper roles, what's expected of them, who they are as a person. you know, it was rough going through high school, right? You didn't really know who you were. You were trying to invent yourself. And you could see those that were really good at it because they would switch places in the lunchroom, right? You know, one day they'd be at the geek table, the next they'd be at the athlete table, always reinventing themselves. But most of us, we kind of filtered into the bizarre group we belonged to, and then stayed. We were comfortable. But I think this generation is polymorphous in its identity. And look at the way they work. They don't go to jobs like you and I did. Well, you're a young kid still, but, you know, my generation, we went to go work and we stayed in the bloody job until we retired, right? And now they don't expect that. They, you know, every 2 years they're in a new job. I wonder if this is translating into that, you know.
That is exactly it, yeah. And what we have discussed in the past regarding that is that you're right. I am way too young because I probably have had like 3 career changes over the course of my adult life. If I were born 20 years prior to 1963, I probably would have gone to school, obtained a trade or a degree, whatever, worked for the same company right up until retirement.
Yeah. Of course, those of us born in 62, you know, we're just old stogies.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, it kind of scared me when I realized, you know, I was 11 years in the Air Force, a year at Terminex, a year at Taco Bell, and then 20 years in the post office. So I'm like, oh, my goodness, how did that happen? Because I was only going to stay in here until I got my degree, and then I kept getting degrees. And now I'm so close to retirement, I can't leave.
And thus you became a professor, literally.
Yes. But more out of defense than because I thought I was good at it. I actually had a professor who had to go and give a paper, and so he told me that I was going to teach his class while he was gone. And I was a student. It was a master's class. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. So he told me the general area what to do, and he told me to prep, and that he would, you know, when he got back, he'd evaluate me, and it'd be part of my grade, kind of an extra credit thing. And so I thought, well, all right. And when he got back, the reports were that I was so good that they asked if he could just sit and audit me. And then he made a phone call to a junior college and told them, this guy, you need him as a professor. He's a conservative, but don't hold that against him. And so they hired me, and I had a blast, you know, and that's how I became a professor.
You know, it's amazing.
What I was born to do.
It's amazing that is such an interesting topic because I was explaining, you know, I have had major career changes throughout my adult life, and so has our very own Tim Burton. And hey, Tim.
Hey. Hopefully you can all hear me now. I'm ever so sorry. I had a little technical problem. Don't know what it was, but hopefully with dialing back in, you can hear me. But yes, Kel is absolutely right. I used to be, many years ago, a petroleum geologist, and I spent many years travelling around the Middle East in North Africa and places like Iran and Pakistan. And that was, we're going back quite a few years. Then I became a computer consultant, as you do, and now I just make the odd appearance on Blog Talk Radio and annoy people.
Petroleum engineer, is that somebody who studies KY jelly?
Not quite. I suppose I asked for that one, didn't I?
So did you go get your thesaurus? That's what we thought you left to go do.
Yeah, we thought you went to the bookstore for me, Tim.
Oh, well, I should have done, shouldn't I? No, it was Blog Talk Radio playing up. I just totally lost the sound, and I was a bit concerned because if you log in as a host and you mess about too much with the various settings, I was just afraid it might affect the show. But here we are, all sorted out, so not to worry.
Well, let me, I'm going to mute myself and let y'all get to it. Great show, everybody. Thanks.
Oh, Prof. Hey, Prof, when's your next show?
It's going to be tomorrow night after all. Kelly's not coming in from Hawaii until Thursday. So
yeah, that's right. When I was listening last night, you weren't sure if you were going to have one. But you're having one tomorrow night for sure, eh?
Yep. And we're going to hit a little bit on the Article 5, just a touch, and then we're going to hit hard and heavy on the Second Amendment.
And what time?
7 p.m. Central Texas time. God's
Wonderful.
time.
Wonderful. And that would be 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for me, wouldn't it?
Right. Sorry, I didn't say that. See, I'm learning Canadian.
Hey. Oh, you know what it's like, up here, huh? Oh, Prof, thank you so much. You're a wonderful man. We'll see you tomorrow night at the Underground Professor, folks. Oh, he's fantastic. And he had a really interesting show last night, Tim, his one segment. He was talking about that new character introduced by Marvel Comics. And she's the amazing Muslima.
Oh, yeah, no, I've heard about this. And it's all designed to try and give the Islamic world a better reputation, isn't it? But I mean, well, I don't know about you, but I can see straight through it. It's there is no basis for giving Muslims any kind of preferential appeasement in this way, and it's counterproductive too, because it's going to make the rest of us think that Muslims are in some way deserving of our help in order to improve their self-image. The fact is that they're quite arrogant and puffed up with their own airs of superiority, not to need us to create fictional characters extolling their so-called superpowers. So I just think it's counterproductive myself.
Oh yeah, and she's quite the Henry. That's for sure. Her name is Kamala Khan. She's a 16-year-old Muslim girl who lives in New Jersey. Yeah, she's the new Miss Marvel. And I do encourage everybody to Google this, because take a look at the old Miss Marvel, blonde bombshell, virtually wearing nothing, Tim.
Yes, indeed. I'm not a great studier of the Marvel comic phenomenon. I know there's a lot of people in the United States who sort of follow it assiduously. It's a big deal. I understand that. I get that. And I think there's no harm in people having role models as long as they exude or epitomize virtues and principles that we can all aspire to. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you put a Muslim character into the mix, what you've got to realize is that the values and morals and ethics of Islam are totally opposed to the values, morals and ethics of our Judeo-Christian civilization. So when you put a Muslim in there, and they are just let's say, for the sake of argument, let's play devil's advocate here, that Muslima is espousing virtues and principles which are essentially Judeo-Christian in principle, Muslims are going to look at that and say, well, hey, what's all this about? Muslims don't believe in doing things that way. So I don't think it's going to help Muslims in any way. And of course, we're going to look and we're going to say, well, how come a Muslim woman is behaving in that way? It's totally out of character. So once again, counterproductive is the only word I can think of. Yeah,
exactly. We had some fiascos going on here, technically. This show will be totally edited. But we're going to close out, and then we're going to devote a little bit of time to something that's sad for me. Maybe not for you, but it is for me. But this chapter, though, it has been very informative. I think the most I got out of it was the issue between the rift between Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. I got the biggest out of that one. And, of course, what we were referring to in terms of Osama's lieutenant Ayman al-Zawahiri more or less telling Zakari to slow it down, dude.
Yes, you can certainly sense that there were disagreements within the various groups, and I mean the thing is, if you look back a few years when these conversations were taking place, I mean we know with hindsight how things eventually panned out, but way back in the early 2000s when these conversations were taking place, I mean people didn't know how they were going to pan out. They arguably, people like Zarqawi had great vision, you might say, in that he recognized when the Western world was weak, and he recognized that if there were going to be a time for a new caliphate, and with everything that encompassed, it had to be done when the West was weak, because if the West was strong and they declared a caliphate, they probably would have been blown out of the water. If you had a president like George W. Bush, who was faced with the extent of the caliphate as it is today,
exactly,
he would probably have pulled out all the stops, and by now the whole area of what is currently controlled by the caliphate would be a pile of smouldering rubble. Logistically and militarily, the United States has the power to do that. But what they don't have is the political will. And I think people like Zarqawi actually saw that. He had obviously got a very analytical mind, and he looked at it and said, "There's never going to be a better time. All right, you could wait until there's more Muslims in the West than there are now. But with the weakness of the Western leadership, there's never going to be a better time in the foreseeable future than to start striking at the heart of the Western civilization right now with the formation of an Islamic State." And even then, he was looking at making up plans which were extending 20 years into the future. That's an extraordinary achievement to make plans 20 years in the future and to see them come to fruition, even though you, as the author of those plans, might as Zarqawi was, he was killed in 2006 before came to power. But to see the way that the plans of the Islamic State have actually come to fruition, it's quite unbelievable. You look at the various documents that say, in 2014, we're going to establish a caliphate. Yep, check that one. In 2016, we're going to organise crowds of refugees coming to Europe. That was actually envisaged years previously, and the Western world did absolutely nothing about it. They obviously thought the Islamic State weren't serious. Well, perhaps that's what they thought. But these things have come about almost according to, not down to the month and day, obviously, but in terms of planning 20 years ahead, it's just amazing to see the fruition that's come about. If only our own leaders were as far-sighted and as visionary as Zarqawi was. All right, Zarqawi was head of a group which effectively had declared war on the rest of humanity. So the simplistic thing is to say, well, he's the bad guy and we're the good guys. But we have to, it's not enough just to be the good guys. You have to stand up for your belief in what is good and defend it against the forces of evil. And that seems to be just what our political leaders can't do at the minute.
And, when Zakari was killed in 2006, they thought for sure that he was going to be the caliph, right? And now he has been replaced by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. And this guy is equally nefarious. And so we can expect a lot more fun coming out from Islamic State in the future and coming to a movie theater near you, right, Tim?
Oh, I'm sure, without a doubt. The brutality of the Islamic State will carry on. The Islamic State recognizes that if they hide their fighters and their weapons behind the indigenous population, then the United States does not have the political will to strike if it might unnecessarily kill civilians. That's a huge weakness on you might say it's a very high moral principle on the one hand, but when you're fighting a war, it's a huge weakness to tie one hand behind your back like that. wars, if you're serious about them, you have to play to win. I know I'm making it sound like a game, but the thing is, if you then the thing to do.
Well, they almost treat it like it is, don't they?
Well, they do.
It's like a Game of Thrones.
Yeah, but if you either play the game to win, or you get out of the game altogether and let the other side win. There's no third way, which involves defeating your enemy while at the same time holding the moral high ground. It can't be done.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it certainly can't be done when you've got an enemy that doesn't play by the what we would consider to be by the rules.
And just to close this out before we shut down the show, is that at the end of this chapter here, literally, folks, chapter and verse, that was the core of the differences between Al-Qaeda and what would become Islamic State. Al-Qaeda believed that the tactics practiced by Sakari, which he would pass on to the Islamic State, were counterproductive, arousing the horror and revulsion of the world, which could backfire by stirring the infidels to fury against the Muslims. An infuriated foe is harder to defeat than a complacent one. Personally, I still think on the scale we're on the complacent side, but we're waking up. Of course, that is a bit rich coming from the masterminds of the single event most responsible for sparking the present round of the conflict between the West and the Islamic world, the September 11th attacks. Nothing aroused the anger of the world in the way that 9/11 did. And both Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State read the Quran, which directs them to strike terror into the hearts of the enemies of Allah, chapter 8, verse 60. As Sakari conceded, Sakari would be justified in objecting to his letter by pointing to this divine interpretive. He could also have pointed to the fact that Al-Qaeda and his group shared the same goals and the same beliefs, but differed only in tactics. Now, who's going to be right in these tactics, Tim? You know, is the problem with prudential arguments is that who's right depends on what actually happens next. You can never tell for sure who has the better end of the argument until you see how things turn out in practice. Oh, so important. Folks, please do pick up this book. Zawahiri warned Sakari not to put too much in stock in the praise of some of the zealous young men and the description of you as the Sheikha of the slaughterers. He thought that the Muslim populace would have loved and supported Sakari and wouldn't ever find hostage murder snuff videos palatable. But we'll see Sakari and his successors in Islamic State aiming their PR campaign straight at the zealous young men demographic that Zawahiri discounted, were able to find a mass audience that would be inspired by these murders. So inspired that they would flock from all over the world in the tens of thousands to join Islamic State's jihad, when they weren't undertaking jihad attacks at home in Europe and America. Ironically, bin Laden's organization apparently underestimated the appeal of the strictest Sharia and the most violent jihad, and overestimated the resolve of the United States to oppose it. So today, history seems to have passed to Al-Qaeda by, and ISIS is the ascendant. Sakari, Tim, won the argument.
Yes, indeed. And as I say, I think it was his vision and his analysis of how things might turn out that's made all the difference. I mean, anybody can make a prediction about what might happen in the future, but there are so many imponderables that it takes a real genius to analyze all the important things and to put them into their correct perspective and to actually achieve the kind of result that Zarqawi did. I mean, all right, I'm praising him to the skies, and he is one of the bad guys, so maybe I shouldn't quite put it like that, but the fact is the predictions and plans that he put into effect are coming true even as we speak. They don't have to come true in their entirety, and indeed if the Western world were more determined, we could snuff out the phenomenon that is Islamic State without too much trouble. But Zarqawi was obviously, he obviously recognised one of the important things was the weakness of the West, and so his plans are working out just the way he would have wanted. But I know
exactly.
I know we're winding down the clock, Kel. So I think that was a really interesting and informative analysis of the first chapter, and I'd like to thank you very much for the way in which you presented the topics and we were able to discuss them.
Absolutely. And folks, do tune in Mondays at 3 p.m. With Tim and myself, heard right here on RFB Radio, Red Fox Radio, on Blog Talk Radio. And we will continue this discussion next week. And God willing, we won't have all these technical issues. But I really do want to thank Underground Professor for calling in and stepping up to the plate and practically salvaging me out of the swamp in which I was waiting in because I panicked. But, Prof, you were there, baby, and I thank you, Prof. But, you know, Tim, we're going to close out with a special song, and this is in tribute to David Bowie, who passed away earlier today after a long battle with cancer. He was 69 years old. This man was a rock legend and one of my personal heroes. As a teenager growing up, I loved listening to all of his music. A lot of people don't realize this man was not only a frontman for the rock and roll movement and the progressive rock movement, but he was also a poet, he was also a composer, and he was also a balladeer. And Tim and myself are going to close out with a song honoring David Bowie. Rest in peace, David Bowie. I loved seeing you in concert, by the way, Guy. See you up there soon. Tim, you have a great night.
You too, Cal. And thanks to everybody for joining us.
Absolutely. Oh, Tim and myself, we'll see you tomorrow night at the Radio Jihad Network, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join us, heard on Blog Talk Radio as well. Tim, talk to you soon.
Yeah, talk to you soon, Cal. Good night, everybody. Good night, Cal.
Good night, everyone. And remember, folks, it is mass Islamity, and we must stop the insanity.
It's a god-awful small affair to the girl with the mousy hair, but her mommy is yelling no, and her daddy has told her to go, but her friend is nowhere to be seen. Now she walks through her sunken dream to the seats with the clearest view, and she's hooked to the silver screen. But the film is a dazzling bore, for she's lived it 10 times or more. She could spit in the eyes of fools if they ask her to focus on sailors fighting in the dance hall. Oh man, look at those gay men go. It's the freakiest show. Take a look at the low man beating up the wrong guy. Oh man, wonder if you'll ever know who's in the best-selling show. Is their life on Mars? It's on America's tortured brow that Mickey Mouse has grown up a cow. And now the workers have struck for fame, 'cause Lennon's on sale again. See the mice in their million hordes, from Ibiza to the Norfolk Broads. Rule Britannia is out of bounds, to my mother, my dog and clowns. But the film is a dazzling bore, 'cause I wrote it 10 times or more. It's about to be written again, as I ask you to focus on sailors fighting in the dance hall. Oh man, look at those cavemen go. It's the freakiest show. Take a look at the low man beating up the wrong
Hi, you've reached Burger King. To leave a message, press 1.
Hey, Burger King, you want to drive biz? I got this idea. I'm a big fan of the way you cook your burgers, but what about chicken? So why not do a flame-grilled burger chicken?
Burger chicken? How about we call it the new Flame Grilled Chicken Burger from Burger King? A savory flame grilled chicken patty topped with veggies on a toasted bun. Now just 2 for $5. Or mix and match with another delicious sandwich, part of the 2 for $5 deal. The new Flame Grilled Chicken Burger. Only at Burger King. Limited time only. Price and participation vary.